Welcome to the podcast where sustainability gets real. I'm Alan Stenson, I'm your host, and in each episode we uncover the people, ideas and actions driving the journey to net zero. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Emission Possible, the show where we explore anything and everything to do with the world of net zero, with sustainability, ideas and innovation that turns climate ambition into real world impact. Today's guest is someone who's quite literally right at the intersection of two of the most powerful forces shaping our future, technology and sustainability. Marcus Knight is the founder of Be Green AI. He's made it his mission to help organizations, particularly SMEs, to use digital tools and artificial intelligence in a way that's not just smart for business, but right for the planet too. He's spoken at the House of Lords, worked on national task forces, and is a very passionate advocate for what he calls mindful AI, cutting through the hype and making sure tech supports people and systems that we all care about. Marcus, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to talk today. I think it is a really interesting topic, certainly something I get a lot of questions about. A lot of people are very curious. A lot of people have an understanding that they know digital technology has a real world ecological impact, because AI has brought that very much to the forefront with all the articles and news that we see, particularly around data centers. But a lot of people don't really understand what that means for them and really what it means in the greater sort of cycle of sustainability. And so hopefully we can answer a few of those questions today, leave people with a bit more understanding.
Yeah, fab. Well, let's dive straight in. How do you think AI can help businesses become more sustainable and profitable? Automating processes, reducing resource use, all that sort of stuff. How does that fit within the decision making? And what do you think is a good approach for particularly SMEs to take?
Yeah. I mean, what AI is good at is, reducing waste, whether that is something within a supply chain or that could actually be human labor, which is, the most sort of cost effective, also cost intensive aspect of running a business, right? So it can certainly help improve efficiency and sustainability when we look at using it ways of trying to measure, the processes we're going through. I mean, if you do have a long supply chain, it can give us better understanding, of that in detail, if we're able to get that and understand where we can make changes to reduce, the physical waste or actually run things more efficiently within a supply chain. But I think it's also a really, really powerful tool internally for organizations that actually looking at ways and being able to make their everyday operations more efficient, which is a huge, huge task, particularly if your company is already working, within the sustainability area in some aspect, right? The more time that we save on the time that we're doing remedial tasks, obviously the more time we can actually focus on creating greater impact. So I think it's really beneficial there. But it can also be an amazing tool. One example I really like to use and like to tell people is using something like a ChatGPT or any LLM. What's great about it is you can put obviously a lot of information into it about your business, what your business goals are, how you'd like to be more sustainable, and you can set up weekly tasks for it to come to you saying, hey, why don't we make this one small change, And what's beautiful about that is it's kind of doing the heavy lifting for you. It just comes to you saying, look, if we make this little change, then we can make ourselves slightly more sustainable. And even though it might seem really small at that time, 52 weeks of making small sustainable changes would not only make your business more efficient and cost effective, but obviously you're taking better steps to improve the sustainability. And obviously where that is of real value is when you hit that intersection of it being financially beneficial, but also improving sustainability, which is highly, highly possible, because when we increase efficiency, then obviously quite often we drive down costs. So it's about trying to find that sweet spot within your company, which can be really hard. It can be difficult. And this is why AI is good, because it can, again, do that heavy lifting, have that understanding about where your business sits, how it operates, and then really tie in what's going to be the most beneficial to help you save money and effectively run your operations in a more sort of eco-friendly and sound way.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, as a tool, it can be an incredibly powerful one. I think there's been some studies that show, or certainly estimates at the moment, that AI potentially could be reducing global emissions somewhere from sort of 1.5% to 4% by as early as 2030. And that that can be smarter energy systems, predictive maintenance, circular economy optimization. So these are the types of things that it can really bring to the masses and make people aware that there are tools that can be adopted. So as a reference point, I think it's fantastic that everyone has access to this, and it can certainly provide a lot of support. What would you say in terms of sustainable AI or green AI? What does that mean in practice beyond just the buzzwords?
Yeah, I mean, so some people within the industry have started to try and define different aspects to both sustainable or green AI, and where the line is usually drawn in that respect is, although there's a lot of overlap, I guess the distinction could be that sustainable AI perhaps refers more to the context of using AI for sustainable means. So this could be using AI in a project that's tracking, deforestation or climate change, something that involves a lot of data. And it's about how can we utilize AI technology to serve the needs of sustainable projects. Whereas perhaps green AI might lean more towards how you build the infrastructure. So actually how you can look at using AI in a way that minimizes its impact. So this is where we look at ways of trying to measure our usage, try and look at ways of hosting it in different ways. So perhaps we're using servers that are more eco-efficient, and maybe they're powered by renewables. We look at options for hosting locally, or even edge devices where we run AI from things like mobile phones and laptops. And there was a great TED talk by Sasha Lucioni. I hope I got her name right there. But she mentioned about how actually a lot of these sustainability projects all around the world are actually running from refurbished tech. They're just running localized LLMs from a laptop or from a phone. And obviously that in itself is a very sustainable way to be utilizing AI. The issue for the issue for most of us when it comes to engaging with AI is obviously we're using, mainstream AI models, things like ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, and these all running on the cloud, which are obviously using data centers that are, massive drains on energy resources and water. And so that's really where the ecological impact comes into it. So I guess if you wanted to define it in one of those two ways, and I think the industry is still kind of sussing out exactly what means what, but I think, sustainable AI is perhaps how we utilize AI to improve sustainability, like you're talking about global supply chains, circular economy. Again, it can have a massive effect. I think if we as a globe able to take all these different data points, process them, use AI to really see what's going on, and almost even if it can make decisions, if something happens in one part of the world and then we can respond in another part by producing energy at a particular rate, this could be amazing. So I really, really think on a global scale, AI could be the thing that really, really helps save us. But obviously we do need to look at the implications of the AI systems we're running and look at running them in more clean and eco-efficient ways, which I think that's where the green AI aspect comes in.
Yeah, it's fascinating because it's a common misconception that online activity is free, right? It's like like you and me are on a Teams call, and there's no emissions, but clearly, I think people are now more aware that there's very much an impact of what we do online and the energy consumption, water consumption, the ethical issues in terms of land grab and all of the things that go behind the scenes are pretty significant. But there's no getting around the fact that as a tool, it's absolutely driving efficiencies. And in real world cases, we've seen logistics firms reduce fuel use by 10% and waste cut by 20%, through, the measures that they're accessing through AI. And even I've got a stat, 8 to 16% energy saving using intelligent HVAC and lighting control systems. These are very much tools at our disposal that could be used. And collectively, I mean, we talk about the SME market, but SME globally is responsible for 40% of business emissions. So it might be one small company, but as you said, collectively, that can make a very, very big difference. So adopting this as a way to improve efficiencies, I think is absolutely the right way to go.
Yeah.
In terms of, the concept of mindful AI and digital adoption, I know this is something that's very close to your heart. And and balancing productivity gains with environmental and social impact. What's your take on that, and how is that helping to shift people's understanding?
Yeah. So, I mean, the term mindful AI, could mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And from my perspective, it's about how you strike that balance between, financial efficiency, time efficiency, and also sustainability. And it is a very, very difficult one to do. I mean, there's no silver bullet to using eco-friendly AI right now for most people. When I speak to businesses as well, their primary focus is exactly that. They want to know how it's going to save them time, save them money. And as much as people want to support sustainability, the reality is that is always a secondary thing. So it's about how can we provide the systems, the knowledge, the understanding that allows businesses, particularly in, like, say, the SME space, particularly in the social enterprise space, where budgets are tight, time is limited. How can we provide these systems that are available to us now, can have significant impact, but also approach it in a conscious way? And I think maybe that's the key term there. We could switch mindful and conscious, in and around. But my belief is that a lot of the issues that we have right now comes from a lack of understanding. People are aware there's a problem, but they don't really understand what it is. And in some ways that can lead to, oh, well, maybe it's not that much of a problem, through to the other side where people don't understand the problem. So it's the biggest problem in the world. Like AI is a tool for evil and is not something I should be engaging with, which is obviously a really significant problem for companies, because if people aren't embracing this new technology and technologies in general, then they're going to be at disadvantage, and that's the reality of the landscape. So we want people to feel comfortable in how they're using AI, how they're integrating it into their workplaces and their work systems, but we want to give them the knowledge and understanding so they're able to do it in a conscious way, in a mindful way, so they have greater understanding, so like they understand what it means, what the impact is, but also how they can go about setting up better systems. Because the reality is, when we look at digital technology and infrastructure, it's very much a future thing, right? Like, once something is set up and in place, it's very, very hard to then undo it. And what we have right now is a very, very unique opportunity, which is a lot of people haven't really integrated AI in a significant way. Maybe they're using, a chat model from day to day questions, right? But a lot of people are still, beginning to explore and experiment what it really means to have an AI infrastructure. So this gives us a really, really unique opportunity and quite a small window to make people aware that the technology and the way that they set it up now is effectively how, it's going to have an impact long term. And so I think it's really important that people have the understanding, and it gives them the agency to then decide what is right and wrong for them. And again, this comes back to this idea of, what is mindful, what works for someone and what someone might be willing to compromise on will be completely different for others. But if we approach it in a mindset of understanding, we look at our situation and go, okay, this is what's going to work, this isn't going to work, then at least we're collectively working towards a common goal, which is understanding that this technology is great, but it does come with downsides. And this is what we can do to try and offset or minimize those wherever we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, what are, in your experience, some good examples to share maybe of digital practices that have cut energy or saved time or cut costs, but bearing in mind that people are looking for these solutions without the compromising of performance or growth of the business?
Yeah. So, I mean, one difficulty of sitting at the intersection of AI and sustainability is that, with AI being, ubiquitous, it's free, it's easy to access. Sometimes it can be quite hard to explain, the return of investment on that, which is what people want to understand. If it's going to be sustainable, then how is it going to make me more money, right? And that can be a difficult thing, just because it's not that there aren't solutions out there, but the technology is still evolving and it's not that cut and dry apparent, particularly because digital is such a hard landscape to measure, anywhere in regards to, its actual impact. So, I mean, let's try to explain it in ways of, sort of logistics in general. So, if you're looking at, making your supply chain more efficient, then long term, that is going to bring, cost efficiencies too, right? So, and we can look at that with digital infrastructure. If we're looking at systems like automations or agents, and they'll be running via, the back-end API, right? So when, the user goes to ChatGPT, we kind of engage with it and we don't really have that much impact. But when we're building tools, obviously we're using their API, and that's all charged on token. That's on the amount of usage, right? How many words we use. So building more efficient systems, obviously, ultimately, long term, if you've got this thing running in the background, it's going to cost more and more if it's not set up in an efficient way. And this is where the gains are made. So if we're looking at building, let's just say we have an automation within a company that, I don't know, let's just say it's scanning emails, pulling data points from that, compiling it into a sheet, right? One thing that we try to advocate when we're looking at building systems for people is like, okay, well, how often does this piece of software need to run, right? Because it's very, very easy to have an automation running in the background and updating every 15 minutes, but that means it's constantly on. And that's the downside of digital tech, right? Everything we save to the cloud is always on, is always using energy via the data centers, whether we need it or not. It could be sitting there for a year. We don't touch it, but it's still there. It's still consuming energy and water, via these data centers. So by looking at the way we build tools and asking these conscious questions, as alluding to what we mentioned before, we can increase efficiency and keep costs down as well, because you're not using things unnecessarily. So again, the same sort of thing there, but because it's not using as much, it's not costing as much. So there are gains to be made. And it's a bit like having like a green website, I guess. It's not directly obvious that green website is going to save you money, but having a website that runs more efficiently is obviously going to be far beneficial and ultimately long-term probably lead to greater gains. So it's not always a cut and dry thing. It's not as clear as saying, well, if you build this, this sort of eco-conscious AI system, then all of a sudden it's going to produce you more money than the alternative system. But again, it's about striking that balance between the values of an organization, perhaps even ESG targets. I think another aspect actually that's really worth talking about, and maybe that, we'll talk about this, we come back to sort of governance and policy, but, right now there isn't a huge emphasis on businesses of all sizes to have their sort of digital infrastructure in check. I do wonder, with all this conversation around data centers, the fact that we are looking at energy scarcity, we are looking at water scarcity, and whilst there is a focus on building better running, more eco-friendly, data centers, these things will come, within a decade or not. Maybe, within 50 years, we might have data centers in space, but these things are very, very long way. What isn't is our energy consumption. I had this graph that I quite like to refer back to from a US Senate committee on energy consumption of generative AI. And the exponential curve is just phenomenal, and this goes to 2030, so that's only 4 years away from now, and it just grows and grows and grows to a state where you wonder if normal energy systems can actually keep up with it. So I think it is really, really important that that we're making these gains and trying to save there.
I totally agree, and I think the awareness and the understanding of the overall impact is absolutely paramount, because it, as a sector or an industry, if you like, it's growing so rapidly. I think it was last year that AI accounted for, breached 50% of global data center electricity use. That happened last year, and so we're growing at such a rate. I often run the comparisons. I've spoken about this a lot in terms of, the aviation industry. And you look at our online activity and the impact of both. And, traditionally people looked at flying as bad because it's highly, intensive in terms of carbon emissions. But to put some perspective and reality to that, AI and aviation is essentially like for like at the moment. And the difference between those two sectors is the aviation industry is significantly reducing its footprint and is on a clear pathway to net zero and hydrogen powered flight and synthetic aviation fuel and all these sorts of things. Whereas the AI industry we're still in that growth phase of rapid expansion and rapid acceleration of energy consumption, water consumption, and all the things that we know are finite resources and need to be resolved. So
this is kind of the curse of the digital technology, because it's so many points removed from us, right? We sit on our laptops or our phone, and it's like we can understand that this thing uses electricity, so we have that level. But when it comes to using AI tools, this is in a data set. It's probably not even going to be in the same country as us. It's running in different places. We have no idea and we've not really been given that much information on, on the stats of what they're using, but we have some good ideas. But it's so far from the user's mind. Now, we all see airplanes flying in the sky, so it's really, really easy to understand. Like, oh, well, yeah, that must be using loads of fuel to keep this massive metal, machine propelling through the air, right? So that's really easy to understand. But it's so hard, even when you understand the process, it's quite hard to mentally conceptualize how much energy digital technology is using. And obviously AI is sort of made people more aware, but this is, if you think about social media, emails, video calls, all this thing is using the same thing, but AI has kind of propelled it into the forefront. And that might actually be just a saving grace, because now we have a time to start addressing and talking about these things. But at the same time, these AI providers, the rate at which they're looking to expand is not only, it's aggressive. It's aggressive expansion, right? And there seemingly, while there may be conversations on to improve efficiency of data centers, seemingly, to me, it feels like there isn't a real consideration on sustainability. A lot of happening in the US. We all understand what the current administration's mindset is towards sustainability. It's drill, baby, drill. It's certainly not, let's put the brakes on this until we can provide something better. So the real challenge becomes how we keep up. And I think as a society, as a globe, I think this is going to present real problems, which I'm just not, I'm not sure the rate of infrastructure can grow as quickly. So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. It was the same. It reminds me of when the UK government put the net zero targets in place, and all fossil fuel related vehicles, manufacturing of that needed to cease. And again, all great things and absolutely needs to happen, but the infrastructure needs to be able to support that. I think on the last count, it looked like something like if you transitioned every single vehicle in the UK to an EV vehicle, you'd need 60 gigawatt stations to handle the power and to generate the infrastructure to be able to do that. And at the moment, we've got 3. So we're nowhere near where we need to be to handle that kind of transition. So these things do need to be factored in at the beginning, not oh, we've got a problem now, how do we face that? Oh, we can't.
Well, it's exactly like I'm saying. The thing with digital infrastructure is very, infrastructure in general, I guess, is very hard to undo once it's built. So we do have a chance to try and do something better about it now. But I think it's interesting you're saying about, the government, came along and set these policies. And right now, this, to me, that there seems to be a very obvious gap, an elephant in the room, where we're not on a sort of governance scale talking about digital sustainability. A lot of companies are expected to report, of a certain size on ESG target. These are things that companies go in, they audit, they produce it, but digital is often missed from that. And I do really wonder if we're not that far away from, particularly places like the EU, where perhaps sustainability is more of a goal, the SDGs. And I'm wondering whether we may get to a stage where businesses, perhaps of a certain size, but perhaps all will need to start trying to find ways of measuring their digital output and auditing it in order to be able to assess and limit, obviously the impact of that. I think once we get to that stage, I think we're going to see something really interesting there, because I think if it's something the businesses are obliged to do, then all of a sudden we are going to have a lot of focus on ways of being able to measure, which isn't easy. But right now, there isn't that much incentive for a business to reduce its digital footprint, right? It doesn't matter to a business unless it can make marginal, financial savings. But when it becomes policy, then I think we're going to see a very, very different landscape. And to be honest, I think we need to see this in the next couple of years. Otherwise, I think it's going to be too late.
I agree. If you think about how, from a compliance perspective, how we report in terms of carbon emissions. So when you're using fossil fuel or brown energy, for instance, you have what's known as well to tank or transmission and distribution losses. So that's part of the carbon calculation. So it's easy to see what 60 litres of fuel, when you take the pump and you put it in your car and you fill it with 60 litres of petrol, that's easy to see what the footprint of that fuel is. But what you also have to report on is the well to tank emissions. So in other words, the extraction of the fuel from from the well, the processing, refinement, the delivery of that fuel to all the different filling station networks, basically all the things that you don't control, but you're responsible for because you just bought the fuel. So it's the same thing with AI technology. You're using the online tools, and you're responsible ultimately for that portion of that energy and that impact. So we should be reporting on that. And I don't think that should be something that we get to in 10 years from now. I think we should be getting to it ASAP.
Yeah, I mean, there is people out there looking at life cycle analysis, and that's kind of how we look at it in regards from the digital aspect. But the problem is it's not easy because a lot of people are working from what they can find research. Obviously, the information, if I'm using ChatGPT, there's nothing from OpenAI to really say this is what it's costing, right? There's other players like Mistral that released quite a good report on their open source AI model. Google did something a little while back talking about sort of the median prompt of Gemini apps, but it's all quite shrouded and quite vague. Part of it, I think, is it's quite hard to keep up and measure. It'd probably take a team of people within an organization to get exact information that stays up to date. But I also think it's in the vested interest of these AI companies for people to be in the dark a little bit. But there is a big community of people out there trying to find this information, and so that we can keep these companies accountable. But it is really tricky, and this is why, again, I wonder when we look at governance, if governance says, well, businesses have to measure their digital output, whether alongside that it means, well, the people that are making the technology also have a responsibility to make reporting possible. Because if ChatGPT could give me a tool to say how much I'm using, just a simple API, I mean, that's such a significant part of it done, right? So
use it.
So I think this is a lot of top level influence is required here. But what can we do about that as consumers? Well, I think the more we talk about it, the more we kind of keep looking for options. There are more sustainable options coming onto the market. I work a lot with a company, Green PT, and they're kind of in eco-focused, renewable energy powered chat model. There's tons of different offline models that you can run locally from your laptop. I think making people aware of these and then making conscious consumer choices sends the message. And the more people rant and rave. I see a lot of kind of memes around, data centers stealing water and stuff like that. And, the reality is people are venting about these things. They're like, well, when so many humans are suffering, why are we prioritizing, data centers? But I think this is really important. I think it's really important that, again, it comes back to this idea of understanding, knowledge, education. And I think that's the primary focus, particularly of what I do. It's really about educating people first, because then I think the more that we understand it, the more we can challenge it. And so it's from kind of then from a bottom down, because the more noise we make, the more that government bodies kind of have to listen to it, alongside their massive AI pushes. But they understand that it's also important that they're tackling the sustainability, and then from that as well, it puts more emphasis on the AI builders and providers to do something. And if they're going to lose all their business to a model that can show that it's more sustainable, then it starts a sustainability arms race, which would maybe be a bit of a pipe dream, but it would be nice to see.
Yeah, it certainly needs more or clearer regulation and incentives, and a data governance framework, because otherwise it's slowing the responsible AI growth. It's slowing that down, and I think a lot of that does come back down to regulation. I think it needs guidance. I think it needs support, education, and as you said quite rightly, we should be talking about this more, to apply more pressure to ensure that these things that are outside of our control but we're aware of don't get missed and do get covered. I mean, I know there are a few things, here in the UK. There's government-backed programs, the Green Growth and SME Climate Hub. These are guided actions and frameworks that can help. So I know there are tools coming, but I think it's something that we need to really accelerate and expand, and ensure that people have these tools to at their disposal to actually make a difference. But going back to things like the your contributions to like the Willow Review task force, what policy changes do you think are needed, and what else can we be doing to really help sustainable business growth?
Mm. So yeah, it was a great opportunity to be involved with the Willow Review. Obviously, it was an initiative looking to link profitability and sustainability for SMEs, and I think they were able to do that. What was interesting from my perspective as a digital professional is a lot of the emphasis, understandably, is actually focused on, I guess, like real world sustainability actions. You know, it's looking at ways of like decreasing your energy bills or looking at your supply chain. And as much as banging the drum on the digital side of things, again, right now it feels like it's perhaps too far removed for businesses to really be thinking about digital architecture and infrastructure. But I think, again, coming back to, you know, almost our starting point there, I think there is so much that AI can do to help the everyday business owner, small business owner, speed up their processes, you know, make their operations more streamlined, save money, but also help educate them. And again, you know, we keep coming back to this idea of education. And I think that is so utterly important right now in this space, because I think it really is the foundation of everything that moves us forward, hopefully, to utilizing tech in more sustainable ways. So I would like to see going forward more conversations around it, but I think it's indicative of the industry at large. You know, we talk from the biggest companies down through to, you know, the solo entrepreneurs, and the reality is there's just this lack of awareness, not ignorance, but just lack of awareness about, you know, the impact of digital infrastructure. And I guess ultimately that's kind of our driving mission at Be Green AI, is that we want to be able to bring technology to people to help benefit them, particularly if they're in the social sustainable space.
And
But give them
yeah, and it's
give them that understanding.
absolutely, and it is, you know, it is working. I mean, it is. I know you've referenced this before, but in Denmark, the resource flow optimization that and circular economy policies have led to some sectors cutting waste by over 50%, but while also boosting their profitability. So, you know, these things can be done,
Yeah.
and I think it's the mindset shift and looking at things more laterally and understanding, you know, sustainability isn't just environmental. It's commercial, it's social. You know, you could be the greenest company in the world. If you're not making money, then that's also not sustainable.
Yeah.
So you know, we need to have, we need that approach that ensures that it clicks and people understand, okay, well, this is why this is a valuable um, task for me to get my head around, because it's going to add more value to what we provide our clients, or it's going to help us become more profitable. And if we're doing that in a way that's also good for the environment, then, you know, everyone wins, and that's exactly where we want to be.
Yeah. So one of the key findings from the Willow Review was exactly that. Is actually, I think it was something like 60% of business owners said that, you know, the sustainability actions made their brand better perceived by clients and customers, right? And so what I really want, and honestly, what a real sort of pipe dream vision for me would be, is to start seeing companies, you know, carry the baton of digital sustainability, to say, you know, we're a digital first company. You see this all the time, right? We're AI first, we're digital first, right? But I want to see them people being like, but we're using cleaner tech. You know, we're one of the few companies in the space that's actually looking at cleaner tech and using that as a marketing angle, as a communications angle, to be like, look, we actually do care about making a difference. So much so we're doing this one thing that no one else is really looking at. And I really like to think that if you're in an industry that really does care, where your clients, your customers really does care about sustainability, to say like, we've cut X amount of carbon out of our sort of yearly emissions by looking at our digital infrastructure. And I think that's a great selling point, particularly if it aligns well with your business. You know, maybe if you sit more in the digital space or something like that. But that would be amazing to see. And what a competitive advantage to be the one business in your sector to being like,
Oh,
yeah,
completely.
we are doing this.
It's a positioning exercise, because at the end of the day, we're all, to a degree, at the mercy of what we spend our money, or who we engage with, you know, as in that element of our scope 3 carbon emissions that we don't control. But it needs to form part of our decision making. So if I'm working with a supplier, I want to know that that's the right supplier, not just based on the price of something, but what's the cost of doing business with that supplier. And if they can demonstrate that they're actually driving real value, and they're quite literally helping me to reduce my footprint because of the steps that they've taken, that's a huge reason to buy from them. So it's a fantastic differentiation. It's a fantastic positioning exercise. It's an added value element. It's something that your customers can rely on because you're doing it for them. So, you know, that's for me, that's one of the best ways to adopt sustainability is to integrate it into your offering so that it becomes one of the reasons why someone's going to buy your product or pay for your service because of the added benefit that it gives you.
Absolutely. I mean, when we think of it from a marketing sales point of view, we often say, benefits first. So it's not enough just to be sustainable, right? You've got to deliver on what your client wants. But when you're the choice out of two or three and you're the one that's doing it sustainably and still offers the benefits, then that's your deal closer. That's what's going to get you over the line, and
Absolutely.
what's going to be, your competitive advantage compared to, the other companies in that space. So I think it's really important. And again, I think as policy governance begins to take shape, I think the
Mhm.
companies that are serious about this already and have a head start, I think will be far, far out in front. And not only, from a brand perception point of view, but I actually think, their infrastructure will be in a better place. They'll be
Yeah.
much easier to audit, and I think they're actually going to find, compliance much, much easier.
Yeah, I absolutely support that. I think it's clear, really, in terms of certainly the next decade or so of where we're going is optimizing efficiency and um, reducing impact and improving insight and education and understanding for all parties. I think that's something that AI can absolutely support.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean,
what in terms of the future?
oh, sorry. No, I should say there's obviously a really, really big emphasis on pushing AI right now as well, because obviously the UK, I don't know if you've seen, the UK government has recently, announced with a big sort of training platform, what they want to make 10 million people AI literate by the year
Oh well,
2030. I mean, that's only 4 years away, and 10 million is a lot
yeah,
of people. So like, it is exactly that. It's a huge priority, for the UK government and governments everywhere, because they know that it is so unbelievably important. There isn't a future where, where people can't be AI literate. I think it's going to be
yeah.
fundamental. But again, this is why it's so important to strike that balance, because you're right, efficiency saving, understanding how to use AI systems, what they mean, how they operate is an absolute priority. So
Yeah.
now is the time that we also tag on that conversation of conscious, conscious use. And I think for me, this is a really big thing. If 10 million people need to be trained in how to use AI, how many of those are going to understand what the ecological impact of that is? And I think that's
Mm.
important. And that's not something I've heard a lot about at this moment in time.
I totally agree. And that again, from the risks, and ethical questions around AI's environmental footprint. We need to be better prepared to address that, and be able to do that in a way that's not restricting what we need to do. Because I totally agree. We need high levels of efficiency. We need to embrace technology to enable us to achieve more, to become more productive, and to increase our levels of growth. I fully support all of that, but we do need to be able to do that in a way that has a lower impact. And if we can do that consciously, I mean, there's been the cooling requirement for data centers has been a major driver, and there's been some clever systems where they're extracting the heat from the data centers and then using that heat to power heating and hot water for the building itself. So again, it's closing the loop and making sure that that's adding value. But there are serious concerns, and I think that's really what we need to be addressing, particularly with all the push on growth within the AI world. It can't be business as usual, because particularly at the rate that we're accelerating the growth, is that we're going to be using far more fossil fuel related power and far more water than we can afford to, at a point where we need to be reducing that. So lateral thinking and understanding what can be done differently to create the same level of support and performance, but in a way that has a much lower impact. And that, I
Yeah.
guess that's the challenge that we're all facing, and why we need to be doing. You can't stop travel, but we can potentially make travel with a lower impact. So
Yes.
therefore, great. You don't have to restrict to find a better way of doing things.
Yeah, I mean, this is the argument of sort of post-capitalist economy, really, and it's you look at the sort of sustainability development goals, and I think the overall arching thing is economic economic development, social inclusion, and environmental sustainability. Now, up until this time, we've definitely crossed off economic development. I think we can say that,
Yeah.
but things like social inclusion, there's so much disparity in the world, and there's something that seems to be growing significantly more. And then obviously the environmental cost. And we can't afford, I don't think we can afford to keep just focusing on the economic development. It's obviously really important. Like you say, we can't just decide that's not important. It's how the way the world works. But we really are a crossroad. I mean, we feel like we've been saying it for years, we're a crossroad. It's funny how AI comes along at the one time when we're already, worrying about, climate change and the environment. And then this thing comes along, which, impacts it at an exponential rate and makes it far more complicated. So it's a tricky time, but yeah, I absolutely agree. And the question becomes how do we achieve that? And as a global community, it becomes even more difficult when different policies from around the world take a very, very different view to what is important. For some, it is just about economic development. For others, they do focus more on integrating sustainability. You look at like the Scandinavian countries, integrating sustainability has always kind of been an institutional sort of value, and they're some of the best examples of linking social inclusion and environmental prosperity alongside economic development. So it can be done. We're looking at them as examples. The question is how can we really influence that change on a global scale, where it impacts government policy? And it's, there's the $1 million question, right? If anyone knows, please write in and let us know. But it's tricky, and the thing I consider myself quite a humanist, and the thing that I worry about with human beings, I think we're incredibly adaptive and very innovative. We solve almost every problem we come up against, but only when our back is up against the wall and at some point too late. I'm sure the solutions will come. The question is how far down the road will we be when that happens? How much suffering may have already been caused, and how much harder will it be to turn back, if we can turn back at all, by the time the policy and the behavior and the governance catches up with it. It's an interesting time to be alive, granted, but it's definitely one filled with challenges.
And yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's incredible things happening, and very encouraging things happening. I mean, you talk about Scandinavian countries. I mean, I think it's is it Sweden, where you can literally charge your car as you're driving along the road. It's a it's a green highway, if you like, where you don't need a charge point at home. You don't need to worry about your range issues, because just by driving, you're going to be charging the vehicle because the road's charging it for you.
Amazing.
Hooked up to renewably sourced energy. I mean, that's a way to exist without having to use any fossil fuel, and that's clearly the way that we need to be going. So we need to make things as easy as possible. We need to remove all the barriers to entry. If people can find efficiencies through technology, they need to be aware. They need to know that these tools are available. And I saw a recent study saying the SMEs who are using AI for sustainability purposes and efficiency measures are twice as likely, or 2 times more likely, to report increased competitiveness and attraction. So, and there's a clear reason why. I mean, every business out there is looking at their footprint and realizing, well, actually 80% sat in the supply chain or basically outside of my control. So how am I going to get to net zero when all I can influence is 10 or 20%? So if you're looking at solutions that are actively able to demonstrate how they're going to help you to reduce your footprint, then you're going to be more attracted to buy that product. Also, people are going to want to work for companies that are more sustainable and more ethically positioned, and that's going to make changes. We're seeing that level of change, creating change more rapidly than legislation. There's various different legislations hitting companies of a certain size, but what we're seeing move the needle more is the power and the expectation being levied upon the supply chain, because all those businesses, as I just said, are sitting there thinking, well, I'm not going to get to net zero unless my suppliers help me get there. So of course that's going to mean they need to work with the right suppliers. So yeah, all of these things have to be done. But yeah, it's absolutely fascinating and like I said, encouraging, and it's great to see the work that you're doing and helping people to really understand that there are better ways of doing what they need to do, and ultimately will lead to getting better results, full stop. So it's been It's been a pleasure, Marcus, having you on the podcast. I'm sure we could probably schedule in a second catch up, because
round two.
we're
We'll
only
go into the
yeah.
specifics of green tech. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. We're quite literally only scratching the surface. So there's an awful lot more that we could.
I'm sure within
discuss.
6 months the needle would have moved so much that actually, we'll have a lot more different information. It changes so fast, and keeping up with it is very
You're right.
difficult. But yeah, by a few months down the line, we'll have a different the landscape. Things will be different. So perhaps we can do like a recap part 2,
Yeah,
making sure that everyone's up
absolutely.
to date with the most recent information. Yeah, and stats
Yeah,
that are
great
relevant.
idea.
Yeah.
Great idea. Marcus, just before we finish, where can people contact you or follow what you're doing? What are some good things? And then we can make sure that we've also linked it in the description below.
Yep, sure. So you can go to the website, begreenai.com. It's probably the best way to get all the information on what we do and how we deliver it. I always love a LinkedIn connection, so I always encourage people to reach out. It's always just great meeting people that are passionate about sustainability or work within sustainability and have questions around how they can approach, technology in more conscious ways. If people are interested in testing out a green alternative to ChatGPT and things like Perplexity, then they could try using GreenPT. I'll include a link down below. As an official partner, I actually get quite a good incentive to give to people to encourage them to be using green tech. So that's something I always really like to share. And yeah, I just end with, any questions, reach out, because this is something, again, it comes back to education, conversation, community. All these things are really, really important. And so the more that we can add to that, hopefully the better our chances will be at actually making a real world impact.
Yeah, fabulous. Great way to end the episode. As I said, real pleasure to have you on, Marcus, and we'll definitely schedule round 2.
Thanks for listening to Emission Possible. If today's episode sparked an idea or presented a challenge, please reach out and let us know. Subscribe, share, and stay tuned, because net zero is absolutely possible.